There we go. The recording is now in progress. We are now ready to begin. Tonight is session 3 of our 7-week session. And every time I sit down to work on the next session, I realize I can't keep control of this thing. It takes on a life of its own. So I'm not going to start this evening with the book Coldo di Dofek, My Beloved Knox. If you are still reading it, you still have another week to go through it, because what I have for tonight is going to take up most of this evening's discussion. And rather than try and do too much, I'm making sure that I cover enough to stay within an hour-long framework, but I also want to provide you with opportunities to ask questions. So I'm going to deliberately do less on an evening than I normally would so that we don't rush through our program. Having said that, evening 3, we are going to turn to the question of timing. Okay, we have talked about messianic times, end of days, but what do we mean by end of days? What kind of time sequence are we dealing with? So I thought I'd begin by asking a question, and anybody is free to respond to the question and answer it. This is going to be a kind of a dialogue. My first question is, to anybody who chooses to answer it, if you happen to know, can anybody tell me how old our Earth is? Anybody? Jerry, go ahead.
If I remember, the modern historians kind of puzzle over this, but I think it was like around 5 or 6 billion years old.
All right. Very good, Jerry. It actually, we can be a little bit more precise. And then again, precise, we're going on the basis of the scientific evidence we have. But the figure that is given for the age of the Earth is 4.5 billion years. 4.5 billion with a B years. Now, when I say the age of the Earth, I am talking about not the age of humanity. I'm talking about the age of the Earth itself. If someone were to ask, how old is our planet? When did our planet begin? When did we start the chronology of our planet? The answer is about 4.5 billion years ago. Everybody, we'll start with that. My next question is, does anyone know what year it is in the English calendar? Just raise your hand. This is an easy one. Or let's deal with January of next year instead of finishing up the year. What year is next year on the English calendar? Anybody? Okay, Lori, go ahead.
2025.
2025. Thank you, Lori. What does that mean, Lori, 2025? Where do we get this number 2025?
I know I should know that, but
no, not necessarily. Jerry, I saw a hand up. 2025.
If I remember, some of the scholars try to date the modern years around the time of Christ.
Correct.
So they come up with a figure like 3 or 4 of the Common Era.
All right. It's an arbitrary number. In a sense, it's an arbitrary number. We say that this year is 2025 AD. You know what AD stands for? Anno Domini. Yeah, in the year of our Lord. Now, does that actually mean that Jesus was born on year 0? No, it does not. But for the sake of chronology, we take this point of time, Jesus's birth. BC is before his birth, before Christ. AD is from the time that he lived. And we arbitrarily say that from this accounting of Jesus's life, in counting the years following his birth or following his death, if you will, that this is the year 2025. Now, some people refer to it as AD, which means the year of our Lord. Scholars refer to this as CE. Okay, if you're not speaking in a Christian context, a Christological context, scholars call it 2025 CE, which means of the common era. And era is ERA, not ERROR, okay? The common era. which means that for the sake of dating purposes, when we date time, we use the approximate time that we use that time when the Christian calendar, which was the beginning of Jesus, and we date time from that period on. So this is 2025, which means theoretically, if Jesus was born in year 0, okay, this is 2025 years since that time, okay? Now, let's talk about something else. If it's 2025 AD or 2025 CE, what was it? How do we calculate time using the time of Jesus as our focal point? How do we relate to time before that era? What do we call the era before Jesus lived? Does anybody want to tell me? Go ahead, Leslie.
BCE, before CE.
Right, either BC, before Christ, or BCE, before the Common Era. So basically, it's the negative side of the scale. From 0 up till today, that's the positive side of the scale. But when you go back before 0, that is BC or BCE, before the Common Era. So if, for example, I asked you, when did King David live? King David was a king of England. We don't know exactly, but if I said about what year did King David live, you would be accurate if you said to me, well, he lived about 950 to 1000 BCE, that David lived about 900 to 1000 years before the Common Era. If I asked you, when did Abraham live? That would be conjecture. You might say, well, Abraham lived about 1700 BCE, that Abraham lived 1700, maybe 1600. It's very hard to date these figures. But assuming Abraham is a historical reality, he is dated to about 17 or 16 or 1650 BCE, before the Common Era. So you see, we have a calendar system whereby we have years before the Common Era, or years before the time we calculate based on Jesus, and the years after that time. We are on a number line, all right? And years before the time of the Common Era are BCE, before the Common Era, and years afterward are CE. Does everybody understand that concept? All right. So when I say 2025, I am saying that this is the year 2025 in our calculation of time from the time that we identify as being the starting point of our calendar. We could have chosen anything, but in the West, we use this calendar as our counting time. Now, let me ask you a different question. Does anyone know what year it is in the Hebrew calendar? I have told you, you've correctly told me 2025 on the English calendar. Go ahead, Leslie. What is it on the Hebrew calendar? Okay, you got to take you're still muted, Leslie. Oh. You're still muted. There you go.
No, now it says, mine says mute. You can hear me?
You're on.
Oh, so it's the opposite. The Jewish calendar, isn't it 5785?
Correct.
So we add from the time of the beginning and we add the other 2000?
Well, don't go anywhere yet. According to the Jewish calendar, it is the year 5785. Does everybody understand that the Jewish calendar uses a different reference point? It doesn't use CE or BC or AD. It uses a different calendar. What is the starting point of the Jewish calendar? Can someone tell me when does the Hebrew calendar begin? Okay, Jerry, go ahead.
Doesn't it begin with the creation of Adam?
Creation of the world, actually. Okay. Technically speaking, and here you're going to say to me, Rabbi, that doesn't make any sense because the world is 4.5 billion years old. How can you say on the Hebrew calendar that it is 5,785 years since creation? You all appreciate the difficulty. According to the Hebrew calendar, if you count, the first day of creation is 1 day, the second day of creation is 1 day, the third day, and then you take all those days of creation, and then you take the lives of the individual generations between Adam and Noah, and the lives between Noah and Abraham, and then you take the lives of everybody who lived after Abraham. If you calculated them all up, you would discover that this is year 5785, which means since creation, we have gone through 5,785 years, okay? Now, let me ask you a question. How can we account for the difference between the age of the world according to the scientific calculation, 4.5 billion years, and the age on the Hebrew calendar, 5,785 years? Many people see this as being a contradiction. Many people point to modern scientific discoveries and saying, obviously the Bible, it was not a scientific document. Obviously the Bible had this way wrong. We believe the earth is 4.5 billion years old, but according to the Bible, it's only 5,785 years since creation. Does someone want to explain or try and answer the question of what accounts for the difference? Okay, before I go ahead, Joseph.
When I was a boy in Sunday school,
7:17 p.m.
when I was a boy in Sunday school, I asked our Sunday school teacher, how could this be?
Okay.
How could the earth be only, humans be only this long when we know that dinosaurs were millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago? And my Sunday school teacher described, well, it started with the days that it took to create. And God's days are worth 100 million of our days. God's days are different than human days. And that's how she taught me about why the difference.
So she was trying, Joseph, to reconcile the scientific estimate of 4.5 million years for the age of the earth with the account in the Bible that says the earth from creation, it was only 5,785. And I must tell you that if you ask me what I believe the 4.5 billion year age. If you ask me, Rabbi, do you really believe the world is 5,785 years old and that creation was less than 6,000 years ago? I would say to you, no, I don't believe that. First of all, Joseph is correct. Remember what it says, the first day, the second day, the third day? You were all assuming that a day was 24 hours, but here's the problem. Up until the fourth day, there was no sun and moon and stars, so that couldn't have been correct, okay? It couldn't have been true that the first days were 24-hour days. They were, instead of saying 7 days, let us speak about it as 7 periods or moments of progression of creation. And those days could have been hundreds of years, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, millions of years, all right? So what I'm saying to you is, the way you rationalize it is you say, all right, the Bible counted all of the years from the story of creation and came up with 5785, but our understanding of the actual age of the earth is much older, and we can account for that, as Joseph said, by saying that those first days weren't really human days, they were God days, or as Joseph says, they were much, much longer, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years longer. Nice explanation. It explains the two. It says it's not a contradiction. The Torah speaks in terms of one counting system, and the age of the earth is determined scientifically according to another system. But I want to push you a little further. I'm going to ask you the following question. 5,785 years ago, here's the math problem you can do. You don't have to do it right now, but here's the math problem you can do. Take the current year, 2025. Subtract from the current year 5,785 years. Okay. Anybody have a calculator by them? If you have a calculator by you, take 2025 and subtract from that 5,785 and tell me what you come up with. Go ahead, Lori.
3760.
3760, 3,760 BCE. Now we know, Lori, that that is not the age of the earth. We know, Joseph, that's not the age of the dinosaurs. We even know that that's not even the age of human beings. We believe that human beings, or our prototypes that became human beings, go back much longer than 5,000 years ago. But something did happen, or does coincide with 5,765 years ago. Something did happen in that period of time of 3760. What happened in 3760? It's not the creation of the world, like the Bible said. The Bible says creation of the world. It's not the creation of the world, but something happened 3,760 years ago that the Bible is talking about. What happened about the year 3,700 BC?
Creation of the Jews.
No, Jews don't go back that far. Jews don't go back that far. Jews don't appear till about 2,000 years later. Go ahead, Jerry.
Are you referring to the flood?
No, not the flood. The flood, we think there may have been a flood, but the flood is an event that there is no possible way of dating. We cannot know with any certainty whatsoever when the flood occurred. There was no evidence that we could say positively the flood occurred at this and this year. But there is something that did occur that we can historically connect with the year 3700. Leslie, go ahead.
Well, I don't know, you mean an event, or there was ancient Egypt and we have relics, we can carbon date things.
Very good. You've hit it, Leslie. It is the beginning of human civilization. The Bible is not talking about the creation of the world, how old the world is. It is talking about the creation of human civilization. I'm now going to give you some facts, and I will send you all of the figures to substantiate this, but I'm now going to give you the material that I have discovered. The earliest two civilizations that we can identify historically, there are two civilizations that we consider to be the most ancient civilizations and most ancient societies, the most ancient, I'm not going to use the word city because city doesn't mean anything, but the most ancient, the time when civilization culture begins. What two civilizations were those? Someone tell me the two areas where civilization begins, human civilization begins. You want to identify it? Now we're going to look for a place.
Sumeria.
Where?
Sumeria.
Sumeria is exact. We call the area Mesopotamia, but
That's the one.
the place where it began is a place called Sumeria.
Mhm.
And just for your own interest, we can date when Sumerian civilization began. And here's the frightening thing. Sumerian civilization, according to historians, began sometime between 3,500 and 4,000 BCE. So that 3,700 is right there. According to historians, based on the earliest examples of writing and the signs of culture, Sumerian civilization, from the earliest forms to when it really became somewhere between 4,000 and 3,500 BCE, which means the Torah is dead on, 3760 it said. Okay, 3760, not the beginning of the earth, not the beginning of mankind, the beginning of Mesopotamian civilization, which is acknowledged to be the oldest civilization in the world. By far, I mean, there are two civilizations that are ancient. One was Mesopotamia. Just what was the other, somebody? Tell me just what was the other civilization beside Mesopotamia? Besides Sumeria? Go ahead, Leslie. Go ahead, Elsie. You're on.
Ancient Egypt.
Egypt, that is it. Most scholars believe that history or civilization, not history, civilization, but also began in Mesopotamia or early Mesopotamia, Sumeria, and it was only a little later that civilization began in Egypt. According to my calculations, civilization began in ancient Egypt 3,500 years ago. You hear what I'm saying? If it began in Mesopotamia from 4,000 to 3,500, according to most scholars, ancient Egypt civilization begins about 3,500. I'm sorry, yeah, 3,500 BCE. And what happened in 3,500 BCE? What happened around that period of time? The first of the ancient, there was the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and then the Egyptian Empire, and then we enter historical times. The first pharaohs, the first dynasties, begin somewhere around the year of 32, 33 to 35 BCE. Now, how do we know that? We know that because of hieroglyphics. We're able to trace how old these civilizations are because of the earliest forms of writing. You know, the earliest civilizations in Mesopotamia did not write on typewriters. They did not write on paper or papyrus. They wrote on stone. And they wrote in a kind of writing which I'm going to call it cuneiform. Cuneiform actually comes later, but they actually chiseled letters into stone. The earliest examples of civilization, of Sumerian script, go back approximately 3,600 years. That's how we know that's the time that, by that time it had started. By the year 3,600 BCE, we already have extant evidence of writing in stone from Sumeria. Now, Egypt was relatively later. Egypt did not write in stone. That wasn't the method of writing. Egypt eventually wrote on papyrus, which was a kind of paper. But even in Egypt, the earliest forms of writing, the earliest records we have of Egyptian writings go back not to 3,600 BCE. It goes back to about 32, 31 BCE. So there is a difference between the two civilizations. The two oldest civilizations we have are Mesopotamia, Sumeria, which was the first Mesopotamian area, and then Egypt, which means that when the Torah says we begin our calendar 5,785 years ago, it means that's when the story of human civilization began. So you don't have to reconcile it anymore, Joseph, with days and God's days and what days. What the Torah is describing is the beginning of human civilization. 5,785 years ago, the story of human civilization began. That was the start. And we have been on that calendar ever since. We are progressing on that calendar, which means that we are coming up 3,785. It means that in 15 years, we hit what year? 3,785. What year is it in 15 years, somebody?
15 years.
Everybody's shaking their head. 3,600, right?
Mm.
I mean, that's year 6,000, correct?
No, not at 50.
No, 5,800.
Huh?
You said 15.
5785 and
Oh,
15.
I'm
is
sorry. You're correct. It's 5,800. Okay, 5,800. That is correct. Which means that in 15 years, we are at 5,800 years on the human civilization calendar. Now, there's one more thing you have to know, and then all the pieces fall together, and my little exercise is finished on dating. According to Jewish theology, how old is the earth going to be? Does anybody know how old the earth is going to be? My wife is signaling with her finger, she got it right. But does anybody know, according to Hebrew theology, according to rabbinic thought, how old is the earth supposed to be? Well, I will tell you, 6,000 years. So we're 15 years. You wanted to know why I thought there at the time. We are 15 years from the start of the 6th century. Now, how do I know that? Where do I know that from? If you want, you don't have to do it now, but I'm going to give you the citation. Go to your Bible, go to Psalm, the book of Psalms, and go to Psalm 90. Psalm number 90 in the book of Psalms is where we derive this tradition from. The psalm is called the Psalm of Moses. I know that David was supposed to have written all the Psalms, but actually this Psalm, Psalm number 90, is not ascribed to Moses. If you look at it in your Bibles, Psalm number 90, it says, a prayer of Moses, the man of God. This is one of the original Psalms. Okay, is everybody looking at the verse? Do you see it? All right, let me quote to you from Psalm 90, verse 4. I am quoting in the English. It says of God, for a year in your sight are as 1,000 days when it has passed, like a watch of the night. For God, a day, 1,000 years are as a day that has passed, which means that 6 days of creation is paralleled by 6,000 years. What for God said 6 years of 6 days of creation, but to God, 1,000 years in God's sight are like yesterday that has passed. It is like, that is the equivalent. What does that mean? God created the world in 6 days. And what did he do on the seventh day? He rested, correct? The seventh day we call Shabbat. Shabbat is a day of wholeness and of peace and of oneness. According to the rabbis, the human story will go on for 6,000 years, up to the 7,000th year, and then comes the Shabbat, which will mark the world to come. So when does this period start? Well, the period has already started. We are now close to the year 6,000. Theoretically, Sabbath will occur sometime at the end of 6,000 years. All right. Now let me go on. If the earth parallels creation, and if God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh day and declared that day Shabbat, it means the human drama, the human story will go on for 6 days, for a period of 6,000 years. And then at that period will come the period of Shabbat. In other words, with that period, we enter into the period of Shabbat. Why you keep pointing?
Because you aren't looking straight on.
Oh, my wife is telling me I'm not looking straight at the camera. I've got to look straight at the camera. All right.
Feminine.
All right. Do you want to know when the 6,000 years will come up? When, according to the English calendar, it will be 6,000 years? In the English year 2240. 2240. Okay. In that year, according to the rabbinic account, that will mark the beginning of that world to come. Up until then, we are on human time. But when we reach the year 5740, we have now turned into Shabbat. We have now gone into the times that are predicted to come. What that means is that in the year, 2240, that's what I said, 2240, that is when the Messianic era will begin. Now, what about those 6,000 years of human history? Can that be further divided? The answer is yes, it can. The first 2,000 years of human history are the time before Abraham. Abraham did not begin his mission until the year 1948 BCE. Okay, 1948 on the Hebrew, not BCE, 1948 on the Hebrew calendar was when Abraham began. His life began in 1948, which means that for the first 2,000 of the 6,000 years, It was before the time of Judaism, before the time of Torah, before the time of Abraham. The next 2,000 years, from the time of Abraham, for the next 2,000 years, which end at the time of the Mishnah, is known as the time of Torah. That is the time when Judaism develops and its truths will be inculcated and the tradition will be established, and it will then be passed down to the earth. So those are the years 3,000 and 4,000. The last 2,000 years of the 6,000-year cycles is called the time of the Messiah. The Messiah can come anytime in the last 2,000 years. So theoretically, the Messiah could have come anytime from the year 240 on, the time of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. The Messiah could have come. You are all looking at me and saying the Messiah did not come. What happened? Well, what happened is we weren't ready for it. There's a verse in the Torah that says he will come, he will hasten his coming in its time. What does that mean? If we are worthy, the Messiah can come before that period of 6,000 years. But if we are not worthy, if we do nothing to hasten his coming, if we don't create a perfect world, he will come in the 6,000th year. In other words, we can bring him sooner, but he will not tarry past the 6,000th year, which means that the year 2240 is a time by which we will already see the signs that the Messiah has come, that the Messianic world is here. What I'm telling you, I guess, is that we have 100 and, what do we have? We have 2025. We have about about 200 years left to go. Now, what determines when the Messiah comes? What determines when the Messiah comes? Let's go back for a moment. Basic Judaism. God creates a world. The world disappoints God. He tries to covenant the second time with a person called Noah, who lives 10 generations after Abraham. It doesn't work out well. So God delays again, another 10 generations, forget how many years. And by that time, Abraham comes along. And now God has found someone to begin this count. With the time of Abraham, at the end of the first 2,000 years, the first 2,000 years are referred to in Hebrew as tohu vavohu, unformed and void. It is a period of darkness before Judaism. The first 2,000 years of history are years before Judaism has entered the world. From the time of Abraham, for the next 2,000 years, that is what we would call the golden age of Judaism. That was the age when Judaism developed in the world. From the year 240, when Jewish tradition was solidified, the Mishnah was given. Not that there weren't later works, but the basic law, God had given the law, the oral law to Moses and the Jewish people on Mount Sinai, the oral tradition, which was passed on as well. It was all codified in 240. From 240 to 2240, the last 2,000 years, the Messiah could have come at any time. He could have come any time between the year 2040, between the year 240 and the year 2240. Is everybody still following me? Are you still with me? My wife said I lost you. All right. What I'm saying, I lost Randy. So let me repeat it one more time. The first 2,000 years were the time before Judaism. That was the time of the pre-Abraham period. The next 2,000 years were from the time of Abraham up until the writing down of the oral law, the Mishnah. The last 2,000 years, 2000, anytime during that period of time was the Messianic era, which meant if human beings had been worthy and good, the Messiah could have come in the year 240 or CE or shortly thereafter. But human beings were not good. The year 240 was loaded with terrible events, with suffering, with tragic events. Nations were fighting against nations. People were killing people. And for the past however many, not quite 2,000 years, we have been waiting for the time of the Messiah. Anytime along the way, if we had gotten it right, if we had managed to convince everyone in the world, this is what God wants us to do, this is how he wants us to live, this is what he expects us to do with the world, we could have brought him earlier. In other words, we could have brought the Messianic period earlier because we could have perfected the world. When human beings perfect the world, that is a time for the Messiah. But let's assume we don't perfect the world. Let's assume we keep screwing it up continually, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, millennia after millennium. How long will God allow us to go on messing with, destroying, corrupting his world? The answer is only up to 6,000, not beyond that. Not beyond that. What I'm telling you is, if this is the year 5785 on the Hebrew calendar, we have 115 years before the time when the Messianic era is supposed to start. 185 years. And if you take this year, 2025, and you add 185 to it, the years, you get to 2040. So do I know exactly when the end is coming? I don't know exactly. It could all be figurative, but we're at the end now. There's no question that we're at the end of the story now. Human beings have been struggling to try and make this world better and better for the last 5,700 years, from the time of early Sumerian, early Mesopotamian, and early Egyptian civilization. We have been trying to get it right. And what have we produced? Empire after empire, war after war, disaster after disaster. One nation comes and conquers, and then it is defeated. We have produced a history, a human history of nations conquering and subduing other nations. And we seem in this year, 2025, not to have learned anything. If I tell you today or yesterday, my wife told me that Ukraine was given permission by the United States to use long-range missiles against Russia, that is true. If I tell you today that we are approaching a time in Jewish history where it looks like the events of the Middle East are coming to a head, it is true. The end of days, and I can't predict this, and I know I sound inauthentic, but because I believe as much as I do in this theory or in this rabbinic view, and I'll send you the information, I believe that we are now in the last 115 years of human history. It doesn't mean that something else won't go on, but it won't be the same world after 115 years that it is now. Somewhere in the next 115 years, we are going to either get this correct, we are going to figure this out, and we are going to create the kind of a society that we would call messianic or peaceful, or the age of the Messiah, or the world of peace. We are going to either ourselves create a time when nation will not lift up sword against nation, when people will not learn war anymore, when the lion and the lamb, two natural enemies, will live together, which is a symbol for human beings, human creatures, recognizing the common parenthood of God and the common brotherhood and sisterhood of human beings. We have 115 years to get it right ourselves. But if we tarry, if we blow it, if we continue to screw up, we don't have much more than 115 years left before God himself will bring this human drama to a close. Now, I have given you a historical context. I have told you why I believe we are in the end of days. Because Judaism believes, based on that model, 6 days of creation, 7th day of Sabbath, parallels 6,000 years of human struggle and history, followed by a 7,000th, the beginning of the 7,000th year, which is a time of peace and wholeness and reconciliation called Shabbat, or called the Messianic age. We are right there right now. And if to prove this, the world is conspiring with all kinds of signs to show us that if we don't get this thing figured out correctly, both the natural world and the human world are headed for disaster. Because our time literally is running out. You have heard it said that people say that on the clock of human history, we are at a few minutes before 12. That's pretty correct. When did we start getting close to 12? The answer was Jews believed it began in the year 6000. The 6000th year was the last chance we could perfect the world and bring the Messiah early. I will give you a calendar of events in the last 1,000 years. The year 6000 began in the year 1240. Okay, the year 702240. The year 6000 began. I'm sorry. The year 6000 began in 1240. That was the end of the fifth millennium and the beginning of the sixth. Midnight. So that was 1240 was nightfall. 1240 was nightfall in the Messianic calendar. Year 1490 was midnight on the calendar. The year 1740 was dawn on the calendar. We're talking about this last day. Sunrise fell in 1790. In the year 1790, that marked the beginning of the sunrise of the last day. And noon of the last day occurred in 1990. So we are now past noon of the last day, okay? 1990 marked the very last period of time. It marked the last period of time to come. Okay. Thank you. My wife is signaling me. Before I go on, any questions? I've confused you thoroughly. I hope the notes will simplify it, but anybody have any questions about what I've just said? Thoroughly dumbfounded you all. Jerry, go ahead.
Well, I know many biblical scholars with chronology have used various the lengths of time that the patriarchs lived and adding them together, and they seem to be able to figure out approximately when Abraham.
Correct.
So that's a pretty finite answer there. So the chronology has always fascinated myself.
Yeah. If we say that Abraham's time was the beginning of the year 2000, it was 1948, but beginning of the year 2000, Jerry, that means that since the time of from the time of Abraham to the end is 4,000 years. Okay, we are coming up to that period of time now. If Abraham lived approximately 1800, say 1800 to 0 was 2,000 years, and 2000 and 0 to 2025 is another 2,000. We're approaching the end. So what can I tell you? We know when Abraham lived approximately, because based on the evidence of Abraham's life and the description of his life and civilization at the time, Abraham lived sometime between 1650 and 1750 BCE, approximately, or 1800. We also know the chronology of when Moses lived, because Moses lived based on the genealogy in the Torah. Moses lived about the year 1230, or he lived, and the Exodus occurred about 1230 BCE. King David, Jerry, lived about 1000 BCE, maybe 900. The destruction of the first kingdom of Jerusalem, the first destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the first temple, we know exactly the date, 586 BCE. Okay, it was rebuilt 70 years later. We know when the second temple was destroyed. It was destroyed by the Romans. We know the exact date, 70 CE. We know when the Mishnah was composed by Rabbi Judah Hanasi, the year 240 CE. We know when Maimonides lived. He died about 1200 CE, about 1,000 years after the Mishnah. We are now in the period 5785. We are in the last period of the last day of the story. Okay. In the biblical scheme, we are coming to the end of the story. What does that mean? It means that we have a little time left before either we do what we have to do to bring about this messianic world, or God will bring it about even if we don't do it. One way or another, it will come. Okay. It's an article of faith. I can't tell you I know that for a fact. God didn't speak to me, but I do believe that the year 2240 is the age at which the Hebrew calendar will have gone through the first 6,000 years, and we will then enter the 7,000th year. Year 6001 is the beginning of the 7,000th year. So what I'm telling you is the Sabbath will begin after the year 6,000 is over. What that means is that if there are signs to see, we should be seeing it right now. What was the clearest sign that the end was coming? The Jews have been persecuted for a long time. Abraham was persecuted, or had enemies. Moses and the Jewish people were persecuted. Jews have been persecuted down through the ages. But something happened that marked the beginning of the end. And here's the kicker. Just like I said that Abraham was born in the year 1948 from the creation of the world, you know what happened in 1948 from the zero on our calendar? Israel was created. The birth of Israel is now the beginning of, well, I don't want to say beginning of the end. It is the beginning of the Messianic era. With the birth of Israel, we have now entered the final period. The story is being written as we speak. Go ahead, Leslie.
Now, are you saying this is the end of the Messianic, the end of the Jewish people, or the world, the civil, or all people?
I'm not saying either one, Leslie. I'm saying this is the end of the story of human time. Our story lasting 6,000 years. I'm not telling you, Leslie, at the end of that, human beings will cease to exist. I am not saying that. I am not telling you that at the end of 6,000 years, the Jewish people will cease to exist. I'm not saying that. I am telling you that God, who gave us time to be his servants, to work, to be his stewards, to usher in this period of the world, to make the world what he wanted, he has given us a certain amount of time, and the year 2240 is the date by which it will happen. Okay. Go ahead, Erwin.
What do you think the nature of the Shabbat is going to be? 1,000-year-long Shabbat?
Cannot know. If you want to go by analogy, what is Shabbat? Shabbat was a time after God had created the world in 6 days that he paused from his creation, and he marked the end of the 6 days of creation with a 7th day that was dedicated to Shabbat. If I asked you, Erwin, how would you characterize Shabbat? How would you describe Shabbat? How would you describe it?
A day of rest.
A day of rest, okay.
A day of contemplation.
A day of contemplation, a day of fulfillment, a day of peace, a day in which the potential in the world was finally realized. If God created the world in 6 days, then the creation after 6 days was followed by a period of Shabbat when it all fell together. It all made sense. It was a period of peace, a period of wholeness, a period not of strife anymore. It was a time when the conflicts of the world would end and this new age, and I can't even explain it to you. I don't know what that will look like, Erwin, but it will be a different kind of an age. So Leslie, when you said, what does the world look like? I don't know. Will human beings still be here? Quite possibly. Will Judaism still be around? Yes, it will still be around. But what will happen in the Messianic period is going to be, Leslie, totally different than what has occurred up till now. All right? What it will be, I cannot tell you. No one can tell you. Anybody who claims to describe for you the world to come is lying. All we can know for sure is that God has said that human beings have the responsibility of bringing about the end. And God has promised that in the end of times, when all those disasters befall the Jewish people, which was the sign, God says, in the end, if after all those troubles, all those ills, if the Jewish people turn back to God, return to him with their whole heart and their whole soul, that God will restore the Jewish people to their land. Even if they were scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, God will bring them together and will restore them once more and will bring them back to the land, which is what the end of days is. It is the return, the resettlement of the Jewish people in the land of Israel in the beginning of this Messianic era. Lori, go ahead.
So this sounds so depressing
I thought it
That-
sounded exhilarating, actually. But
that
go
we
ahead.
have to wait till we're dead to experience this messianic period. And like all the prayers and things that we're doing now, does it contribute to when
Yes.
that time happens? Or
Yes.
like what we're doing makes no difference?
No, it
And
does
why
make.
are we doing it?
All right. Here's the difference, Lori. Remember, I distinguished between the Messianic era and the life of the world to come. When you die, when your body ceases to be, the soul which belongs to God returns to God. You don't have to wait till the Messianic era. When you die, that part of you which was created in God's image, meaning that part of you which reflects God, that goes back to its source. You don't have to wait. When we die, depending upon the lives that we have lived, for most of us, God will eventually restore our souls to him and we will have that peace. But the Messianic era, which is a historic period, will occur in a different schedule. When we die, the rewards for our good deeds, the punishments for our bad deeds, that happens in Olam Haba, the world to come, which is the spiritual afterlife. Remember, I distinguish spiritual afterlife from the Messianic era. But the Messianic era, which is a historic period, has a date, and that date is 2240. Okay, that's the date. It is the date. So no, everybody who has lived, who has contributed to bring that era closer, has a share in the reward. And now there are some people who say, and this gets a little difficult, that when the Messianic era comes, God will restore the souls of all those who have died. We call this, Lori, this doctrine, which I'm just going to mention, we call this resurrection. Resurrection means that all those who have worked over the course of the millennia, the 6 centuries, to bring about this world of God, God will restore them all. There will be a resurrection. And it's even more fantastic than that, Lori. The Jewish tradition says that the souls of all who have died will be restored and re-embodied in bodily form. Now, this, I'm not sure I believe, okay? This is the doctrine of bodily resurrection. What that means is the souls of all those who have died over the course of the time, from the beginning till the end, that in this final judgment, those souls will be restored and God will judge everything judge all human beings one final time. So the answer to the question is no, you do not have to wait, and you're not getting cheated because if you die tomorrow, God forbid, you didn't die 115 years before your reward. Your reward will come when you pass away. Your reward will come because the soul that you return to God, the soul that reflects who you were, that soul will return before it. But this age of the final days, this age of the end of days, this day of redemption and resurrection, we'll talk about that later, that will come in the Messianic period. Okay? So do not feel bad. Don't feel, gee, I just missed it by 115 years. You didn't miss a thing, okay? You did not miss a thing, okay? It will come. It just means that when you leave this world, your soul will be restored and the human drama will continue for another 115 years past the date of next year. Okay. What do I want to tell you now? I realize it sounds fantastic. I know it sounds fantastic. What I'm telling you is we have come, okay, Carol, I'll get you in just a second. We have come to the final part of the drama. It's like you've been watching a television serial and you've gotten already to episode 9,999. And I'm telling you, the episodes are going to end soon, okay? We may not make it till the last episode, but it's coming. Carol, go ahead. I'm sorry. You're still on.
I got it. How does this differ from the Christian view?
I will speak about the Christian view of the end of days and the final judgment and the resurrection and the rapture, and I'll speak about that in a later session.
Okay.
Christianity has its own kind of calendar, but, and here, those of you who can help me. I think in Christianity and in Islam, I think all of the major monotheistic religions tend to view today, this time, as the end of days. Is that true of Christianity? Are we in the period of end of days? Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, several of these Christian, whatever you want to call them, sects, I'll say sects, millennialists.
Millennialists.
Some will even try to state that around the time of World War I was a messianic age. Others, but anyhow, it's definitely in this 20th and 21st century.
People have been prophesizing this, predicting this for a long time. And based on the biblical books, everybody came up with an answer. So some people said it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And every time their predictions are wrong, they say, well, I guess we got it wrong. We were figuring the wrong numbers that's going on. The truth is, in Christianity today and in Islam today, whether it's the coming of Jesus, the Messianic era, the coming of the Mahdi and the end of days, the monotheistic religions all believe that we are now in the end of days, okay? If you do not believe me, you can ask your clergyman whether in their understanding of religion, we have entered the end of days. I know that it's not popular to say this. I know there are people with signs that saying the end is coming, repent now or before it's too late. We've been saying that for a long time, but I truly, truly believe that we are in the last part of this drama of human history. The story that we have written, this movie we have created, we're coming now to the end of the story, the end of the tradition. What will occur afterward? Only God knows. Maybe it'll be a wonderful new chapter. Maybe it will be that world where nation lives at peace with nations. Maimonides said it's going to be a new era when nations will live peacefully with each other, when they will not make war anymore. And for the Jewish people, he pictures it as a time of perfect peace when Israel will be restored to the land and they will have a chance to study Torah undisturbed. I don't know what it is. I truly don't know. But I believe that the signs are there. So you're going to say, what are the signs? I'm telling you, there are 7 signs. We are now in the midst of the 7th sign. When did the 7 signs begin? If I say to you, we are in the end of the story, in what year did we get these knocks on the door? A knock on the door is a wake-up call. It's saying, hello there, pay attention, it's coming. The first wake-up call came in 1947, 1948, okay? And they have been coming in rapid succession ever since. I will explain to you starting next week the 7 stages, the 7 signs, the 7 times when God knocked on the door. By the way, for those of you who wonder where does this knocking come from, if you ever studied the Song of Songs, it's a beautiful story about God and Israel in search of each other. Israel longs for its God, and God longs for the people Israel. And there's a beautiful passage which says that Israel is constantly waiting for God. When will he come? When will he come? And then there's a verse, and I'll read it to you next week, that says that at a certain point, God knocks on the door, and he says to the beloved, to Israel, I have come back. The time is now. But if you read the Song of Songs, which we'll do, or that verse next week, the Jewish people are too lazy to get up. They've gone to bed. They don't want to get up and open the door for their beloved. So they hear the knocking at the door. They've been waiting for God all this time. And when God finally knocks, they are too tired, too fatigued, too overcome by everything that's happened to get up and open the door. Rabbi Soloveitchik says that there are 7 knocks that God is now providing to us. There will not be, just like 7 is the magic number, 7th century Shabbat, 7 knocks. Okay. We will start next week with the first couple of knocks. Now you have to start reading Kol Dodi Dofek, the 6 knocks. And Rabbi Soloveitchik in that chapter will tell you the first 6 knocks, and then in the following chapter, he will tell you the 7 knocks. And I am telling you, if you wanted someone to predict what was going to happen, you couldn't have predicted it better. If someone had told you that after thousands of years of not being a state, Israel would be reborn and reestablished, you would say, couldn't happen. It happened. If you were to say, Israel, when it was reborn, was a weak and powerless state, and it was attacked by 7 Arab countries, it could not possibly have survived. It survived. Second knock. And ever since then, there have been knockings on the door. When you read Soloveitchik, you will realize these knocks are very apparent. They are right there. Lori, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I've been reading the book. I don't get it.
Okay.
It's really convoluted. I mean,
Right.
I get bits and pieces of it,
All right.
but it's really hard to understand.
It is.
Like, do I have to go back and read it again?
No. Did you get my notes on the book?
Yes.
All right.
I read the notes.
Let me see if
that
I can.
really helped.
Okay. No help?
It helps.
It
Yeah,
helped.
it helped.
Here's the story. Rabbi Soloveitchik's book is about a problem that all of us have studied before. It's about the problem of evil. The question you'll remember is, if God is good and he created a good world, why does evil exist? This has been a problem that has plagued human beings from the time of Job and Abraham all the way to today. It is the ultimately unanswered question. Human beings say, why, if you are a just and merciful and compassionate God, why do the innocent suffer? And why do the guilty seem to prosper? How can it be, like Abraham said in this week's Torah portion, shall not the judge of all the world deal justly? When God was about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, you remember what Abraham did? He argues with God and he says, God, do you really need to destroy these wicked cities? What if there are 50 righteous people in those cities? Wouldn't you spare the cities for the 50 righteous? And Abraham says to God, you can't do that. You are just. You have taught me, who am teaching my children, about the justice of God. How can you presume to slay the innocent together with the guilty? That, Lori, is the question that Rabbi Soloveitchik asks. And he asks in the first two chapters, he asks the question, how can we explain evil in our world and in our life? I will give you a short answer, then tonight I will give you the other answer. We human beings exist on 2 planes. Randy and I discussed this past week. We exist as, well, we have a life of fate and we have a life of destiny. What do I mean by that? If I believe that I come into this world, I didn't ask to come into it, I didn't ask to leave it, and everything that happens to me happens against my will, whether for good or bad, I am living a life of fate, Lori, which means life happens to me. I am not an active character. Whatever happens to me, for good or evil, happens to me, and I can try and understand it, but I'm never going to understand it. All right? I can look at life. I can try and understand why God does what he does to me, why he did what he did to the Jewish people, why God allows innocent people to suffer and allows guilty people to prosper. So long as I view life as fate, I will never understand the answer. Remember when Job asked the question, God, explain to me, why am I suffering? Tell me why I suffer. Explain to me, what have I done that caused me to suffer? God never answers Job, Lori. He overpowers him. He says, were you here when I created the world? Were you here when I planted all the mysteries in the world? In other words, what God said is, you're presuming to judge me because the world doesn't make sense to you? You're a finite creature. You're a creature that has existed a very short time. You presume to determine whether what happens in the world is good or bad? You can't do that. In other words, to a person who suffers life as fate, there is no answer. It is just dumb fate. All I can say is, I suffer, I prosper, whatever it is, and all I can do is hope that I make it to the end of my life as happy as I can be, knowing that at the end I'm going to leave this world. But just like I didn't choose to be born into the world, Lori, and just like I'm not going to choose to leave it, whatever happens to me in the world is beyond my control. I am an object. Life and evil happens to me. Whatever happens, happens to me. I am an object. Evil on that plane is something I suffer, but I have no control over. But there is another axis of life, Lori. There's another way of looking at it. Not life is fate, but life is destiny. That's when you as a human being, you don't have a chance to, you don't decide when you're going to be born, when you're going to die. And when evil happens to you, the only choice you have, Lori, is what you're going to do with it. I don't know why it happened, but the question is, now that evil has happened, what do I do with my life? How do I give my life meaning? I'll explain it with an analogy that Randy thought of, which is brilliant. When parents lose a child, and they ask the question, why did it happen? They ask the question of fate. There's no answer. Why did my child die? Why did he die of illness? Why did he walk into the street and get hit by a car? Why was he killed by a psychopathic crazy person? There's no answer to that question, Lori. But people who experience the loss of a child, and that say, what meaning can I give to my child's loss? Who go out and found groups or organizations to make the world better. They take the pain and they say, out of the pain that I suffered, I don't have to merely suffer it as an object of pain. I can give it meaning. I can choose to take what has happened to me and make it better. That's exactly what happened with Job, Lori. Job was a man of great wealth. He had wonderful things. He had a family. He had all the good things of life. Job was given blessings beyond belief. But unfortunately, Job didn't do one thing. He never commiserated. He never felt the pain of the people in the world around him. When people suffered around Job, if he could help by giving money, he would give money. But he was caught up in himself and his family. So long as himself and his family were good, he could commiserate, he could feel bad for other people, but he didn't really join in their suffering. When Job lost everything and suffered, he now knew what it was to suffer because he was suffering. Only when he realized that he has to be concerned not only with himself and his own family, but as human beings, we have to feel the pain of every human being in this world. Then we know what the purpose of suffering is. It is to purify us. It is to take us out of our selfish little corners and say, it's not enough for you to be thankful for what you've been given. When the world turns dark and you feel pain and you know the pain of the others in your society around you, what are you going to do with the pain? How are you going to give that pain meaning? Then you have turned from a life of fate to a life of destiny. What the world does to you is challenges you to make sense of what you have experienced and make the world better. That is what Soloveitchik's book is really about. Soloveitchik said, in the light of the disaster which befell the Jewish people 8 years ago, 1945, how are we to understand Jewish pain? How are we to understand God, who promised us so much, and we were his people and he allowed us to suffer? Soloveitchik says, if you look at pain, if you look at evil as fate, you'll never understand the question. But if you ask the question, what does the evil that I have suffered, what does it obligate me to do? What does it call upon me to do as a human being to make my world better? Then you have translated evil from fate to destiny. That's what Soloveitchik's books. Now, it's very, very complicated. And if you want, I'll do a session with you on that. You don't have to understand the first part of Soloveitchik's book. But if you start on the chapter that talks about the 6 knocks, it will explain to you exactly what I'm going to talk to you about in the next 2 sessions. I am telling you, Soloveitchik believes that for whatever reason, God is giving the Jewish people, he's knocking on the door and saying, the time is coming. The time is coming. And you must now hear my knocking. Hear me calling you, because the signs are all there. And the time for you to do what you have to do, you can't put it aside any longer. You've got to do it. Okay. All right. So having said that, and I delayed this 3 weeks. Next week, possibly a little in next week, we will talk about the signs. And then you are going to have all kinds of questions. No more theory anymore. This is going to be